We'll be starting up here in a little over a minute, for those who are wondering. We're going to give folks about 30 seconds to get logged in. We know there's a few folks still logging in, but we'll get going and still get you out of here in an hour. Okay, good morning and welcome. My name is David Orr. I'm the director here at the New York State LTAP Center, the Cornell Looker Roads program. I want to welcome you to our webinar on basics of a good road. I'll explain a little bit more about this webinar series here in just a couple of minutes, but uh, let's go ahead and get some of the basic stuff out of the way, some of the welcomes. We will be taking some polls using a tool called Poll EV. I'll give you more details about that here in a couple of minutes. Um, but that's also available as an app. We hope to use that on most of these webinars. For those who haven't used Zoom before, I know most of you probably have, down at the bottom of your audio settings so you can hear things. The chat, we do ask you to open the chat up. It's not going to be available for you to put items into the chat, but that's where we put information to you. For instance, there is a handout for today, and if you open the chat up, you should see that in the chat. And you can download that handout. It has some resources. It has an outline of today's presentation, and it also describes the other webinars that are going to be in this new series. You can raise your hand. I may ask you to do that now and then just to answer a quick yes/no kind of question. And there will also the Q&A function that's down there. That's something definitely you want to use that. That's where you're going to put in your questions for me or any of us here at the LTAP Center at Cornell. We'll answer those as we go along. So please do that. We'll watch this by magic, hands up in the air. We can repost the link to the webinar handout. If you've opened up your chat late, you probably haven't seen it. So it's going to magically show back up in the chat here in just a minute. Watch this, hands up. There we go. So you should be able to download that. If you can't get it, let us know. We'll get you a copy of it. Okay. So between the Q&A, raise hands, and the poll everywhere, we should have a little bit of fun. This particular webinar is worth one professional development hour for engineers here in New York State. Because of rules with the state education department, only the person registered will get that particular credit, and it is counted as a course. If you're not from New York State, you'll have to check with your own state's LTAP center to see what the requirements are. Well, let's start with a little bit of a welcome. And just so you know, this is a new series. We're trying to put together a whole list of things to cover the soup to nuts of what we do in the municipal sector. This series is good for young engineers. It's good for highway superintendents. It's really a foundational setup. And we're going to be looking at the whys for every single topic that you've got on the list. So why do we build roads is today's class. What are the basics that make a good roadway? And we'll be doing that for a whole bunch of others in the series. We are going to be using a pollev.com. It's a poll everywhere. If you go to pollev.com and you go to /DavidOrPE, and I'm going to type that in here. I just realized I didn't do that. Make sure I type that correctly. Yep, there we go. You should be able to click on that and it will take you to where you can download, and you'll see something that looks like this presentation. You can just put your name in. We don't record these, so don't feel bad about that. And you can interact via the web, or you can download the app and play along that way as well. So just to show you that, we're going to have a few questions for you to help me out, and also just to make sure that the poll tool is working. The first one is, who do you work for? Do you work for a town, a county, a city, or a village? State or federal government, private sector, consultant, contractor, or the work for the weekend. So let's see what we got here, and you can see the results are coming up, and we'll give everybody just a minute or two to give the answers here. Okay, so actually, third of you with cities. Up here, we got a few more folks in counties, towns. Okay, we got a nice blend. Okay, and again, if you can't get the PollEV to work, you can throw the answer into the Q&A. It does actually look like the chat's taking some names, so I'll go with there. Got a couple of extra town folks listed. Okay, that helps me out quite a bit to see the blend of folks that are involved. Okay. Nobody's working for the weekend. Maybe we're getting used to being back in the office and things like that. Okay, the next question on the list. What is your job? Are you an administrator? Are you let me clear this actually. I just realized I got to clear this. Hang on. Stand by, if you don't mind, for a second. Well, it's not letting me today. It's being persnickety. So some days technology does that. So I know what the initial results were, so we'll see what you can type in there, what your job is. Administrator, highway superintendent or commissioner, an engineer, field crew, board member, and I'll just have to subtract in my brain the folks that had already answered from a previous webinar. Okay. And yes, Bill, I know you could probably answer almost every one of those questions over your career, but I see you put down engineer, but you've been a bit of everything in your history. Okay. And then the third one, and this is actually one I hope you like. This really helps me, and that is, where are you from? In this case, you would actually take your mouse and you'd click somewhere on the map where you're from. And if you're from outside New York, you can put it somewhere outside New York. So we got somebody I see in Niagara County over near Rochester. Little green dots are going to show up. I tried to get the color to be better than the green. I like pink, but it just wouldn't do it last night. But you can see we got folks scattered around. That's good. Okay. There's also a test to see if you know exactly where you are. Okay. Okay, so that's a good sense. We got folks from outside New York. We got all over New York State. And again, I invite your friends, get more of them involved, because this is a series we hope to really evolve, and we hope you have fun with it. Now, these series of webinars, and we've been playing with the name. If you got a really good name, let us know. We've called them fundamental webinars. I sort of call them, in short phrase, why webinars. We're going to focus on why we do things. But really, it's a series. We're going to cover over time all the different topics you need to manage, maintain, and engineer highway system, whether it's a street system or whether it's road system in a rural area, really whatever you've got. Okay. Now, the rest of this year, we've already got scheduled out. Actually, we have into the spring as well. You can just go on our website and search for it. And who, what, and why webinars, I see that. That's actually not a bad idea. This actually comes from a phrase that Len Urban, our previous director, who many of you remember, his phrase was, how do you know what you don't know? If you don't know, you don't know it. And that's really where this all got started. And then the webinars we did during the COVID period sort of helped us lead in this particular direction. So we're going to be doing snow and ice, budget basics, traffic safety, and following that up with signs before the end of the year and then even more into the spring. Now, just to have a little bit of fun, and again, sometimes it's good just to break things up, a little bit of an icebreaker. I know everybody can do poll EV now. What road names? I'm not talking about Smith Road. I don't want the Smith. I want the road. So what's a common thing in your particular community that you use? So is everything called a highway? Is it called a road? Is it called a street? Is it called a drive? Throw some of those in there. We'll create a Wordle just to have a little bit of fun. What do you put on their signs at the end after the, Smith Road, or I live on Vine Street. So we have lane, lane, roads, and the more popular ones are going to get bigger. Let's see what you got there. And people are putting in road in the chat. Okay, so road would get even more. Parkway. Okay. It's amazing how many different names there are. And some are unnamed. They just have a word. Okay. And it's interesting as you travel around. There's circles, there's drives. I like the ones where they call something a circle and it doesn't actually circle, but it's okay. But if you think about it, all of these things are the same. All of us as the public, all of us as in commercial, all of us in government, we want to get from point A to point B. Okay, so whatever we call our streets and highways and roads, they all have the same purpose. So I'm going to ask you now, I'm going to ask this question again. Why do we build roads and streets? So in this case, you'll type in some text. It'll actually show up in little blocks. Why do we build roads and streets? What are you thinking right now? And then I'll go over what I'm thinking of. And I see somebody's got in the chat from the previous question, street, boulevard, avenue, lanes, and parkways. Yep. So we build roads because they act as connections. Someone has put in transportation both in the poll EV and in the chat. Yeah. For safe movement. Yep. That's a pretty important safety. Travel. Okay. Yep. To easily get from point to point. Mm-hmm. Transportation, to move assets, okay, to get from point A to point B, and then haul goods to market. In fact, that's the first federal highway bill in 1916, was to get the farmer out of the mud, the farm to market roads, and the concept of getting our goods to market, because they would rot before you could get them to be sold and eaten by people. So yeah, all good reasons why we build roads. But let's talk a little bit about why we build roads and the engineering and the science behind them, and see if that changes our answer a little bit. Okay. So what I'm going to do is talk about the three things that are the whys that when I was putting this together that came up. Traffic, the structure, why is there a structure, and the geometry. Okay. And of course, it all really comes back to our families, and all of us live on a local road. We start from home, we go to work or school or some event, and we come back to home. And home is really the beginning and ending of most of our trips and our days. And yes, this is my family. It's my grandmother, my mother, my grandmother, and my uncle at a house they lived in during World War II. Moved out of just at the end of World War II. So let's talk about traffic to start with. Okay. Now, this is in Yellowstone National Park. It's a little bit unique traffic, but we have to think about the traffic that's using our roadway. So again, in our poll EV, who uses your roads and streets? What kind of vehicles, or what would you describe? What one word would you use to describe the user of your roads and streets? You've got commuters. Yeah, people going from home to work. You've got bikers. You've got all those different people. You've got motorized traffic. Okay. You've got trucks. Okay. Lots of citizens. Yeah. Farmers. So far, we got a pretty good list here. See if we get a couple more. But if you think about it, that's really what we have to think about. The starting why is who's using the road. And the why then comes back to why we do what we do is to get them from point A to point B. Yeah, the military uses, especially some mainline roads might be needed. Electric vehicles or electric vehicles down the roadway. Okay. I don't see any pedestrians, but think about it. Pedestrians are probably on that list, right? Buses are probably on that list, both city buses or, you know, inner city buses, even though they go in rural areas, school buses, intra-city buses. So those are things you have to think about. Different kinds of trucks, small trucks, single axles, dual axles, semi-tractors. All kinds of different vehicles are using our roadways. All kinds of different users are using our different roadways. Okay. And so as we put together and start thinking about building roads, we start classifying roads, and we usually use a term called functional classification. Okay. In fact, the federal government has a list of functional systems. You can go on the web and you can search for functional classification, New York State DOT or NYS DOT, and you'll actually get a list of the different functional classifications defined by the government. Okay. Um, the link is really long. My advice is just literally just search for functional and then get my pen to work here. NYSDOT. You just search on the web for that. It's much faster. I tried to copy the link. It's really long, but all you got to do is just do that. And if I come back over here to the web and I just type NYSDOT functional, could help if I type today. And then class, because you can see Google says I want class. And right there, functional classification maps. New York State DOT pops right up, and you can actually get a sense and look at the functional classification on your roadways. And there's actually an interactive viewer that you can use. And that, in fact, is where this map comes from. You may want to do that for your own community and look, because there are times when you'll find roads that are mislabeled for whatever reason. It changes some federal dollars you can get. If it's an arterial roadway, for instance, you can get some extra dollars. However, you then have to meet higher levels of standards. So you have to balance between those two. Which do you really want to have? But we really want a functional classification because we have really three types of roadways. And let me erase the ink here. We have principal arterials, interstates, the main routes within communities. For instance, this is Ithaca that you're looking at. So principal arterials here in Ithaca, really, we don't really have any that are in that classification. We have arterials, the green ones on the line, that are maintained by the state. Okay, so Route 13 going through the city of Ithaca is a principal arterial. Okay, Route 79 coming in from the east is a principal arterial. So these are the national highway system, really important highways. Okay, typically maintained by the state, even within the city. We have other arterials. They're called minor by the federal government, but the reality is they're pretty darn important to a particular community. Okay, and this is the main arteries of the system, hence the name. Collectors collect the traffic and bring it to the arterials. In this particular case, the arterial system here is in red. Okay, so those are the collectors, excuse me, my fault, the collectors. Okay, and then the local roads beyond that. Okay, actually, I got my colors off. I just realized red is minor arterials, collectors are blue in this case. They collect traffic. We could debate about that. And the reality is one of the challenges we run into is if you live on a roadway, you treat it as a local road. So if you know anything about Ithaca, there's a road down here on the bottom right. This is Pine Tree Road. It's the main road to get from a state highway over to Cornell University. But there's a whole bunch of houses on it. And so we always have that conflict. We can get a road that's both an arterial, a collector, or a collector and a local, or sometimes all three. And so when we're thinking about why we build a roadway, we're thinking about that traffic, but there's sometimes a conflict that occurs. Now, the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, AASHTO, has actually got another designation that you might want to look at for road standards, and that is very low volume roadways. Okay, these are roads under 400 vehicles per day. Now, they're a little bit lower in terms of design standards, but it turns out they still meet the needs of the users. And again, why do we want to build a road bigger than it needs to be? This actually comes from an idea developed here in New York State back during the Mario Cuomo administration. The idea of developing standards to meet the traveling needs and the needs of the people who live along that roadway. And so it's now a national standard for very low volume roads, but you got to be under 400 vehicles a day. So let's take a little side diversion real quick and talk about how we might estimate traffic. Most of the time in these webinars, we're talking again about foundational, but we'll throw out some nuts and bolts and things that might help you here and there. So let's estimate some traffic. Turns out that the busiest time of day, which most of you know when the busiest time of day is, okay? You can come in here and look at the busiest time. And in a rural area, the busiest hour is about 15% of the traffic, okay? In an urban area like the city of Ithaca, city of Auburn, okay? The busiest time is about 11% of the traffic occurs in that busiest time. Okay, it's not spread out evenly over the whole day. And this is because of what we talked about with traffic earlier with the commuters. So if I want to get a quick estimate of traffic, all I got to do is know the busiest time, go out there, count for 15 minutes, okay? And then I can calculate the traffic for the entire day by multiplying by 4 to get a 1 hour count, and then dividing by that percentage, either 15 or 11, depending where I am. And if I'm a suburban community, somewhere in the middle. You could also just use a multiplying factor. If you do the math, the calculation, the factors are 27 for rural and 36 for urban. It's a pretty simple calculation. And just to illustrate that, let's say I go out there in a rural area, okay, and I count exactly 15 vehicles in 15 minutes, okay? So 15 vehicles in 15 minutes is 15 times 4, and that gives me 60, okay? And then I divide that by my screen tablet decided to go crazy, but we'll call that a divide symbol. It's not my best. 15%. There we go. And that equals 400. It turns out that if you're in a rural area and you count about 1 vehicle a minute going by you during the morning rush or the afternoon when people are coming home, that's 400 vehicles per day. So there's your line that you can say it's a very low volume road and you might be able to use a little bit less stringent standard, which is sort of nice. And you can still use that same standard in an urban area. The calculations are slightly different. So if you think about it from the standpoint of overall traffic, the principal arterial system is only 5 to 10% of our entire system, the interstates, the main state highways. But it carries anywhere from 40 to 65% of the traffic volume, depending where you are both in the state and within the country. If, on the other hand, the local road system only carries about 10 to 30% of the total volume, but it's 65 to 80% of the traffic length. And again, that's where most of us live, and we start our trips and end our trips. So it's important to have the right standards to match the roadway needs and the traffic. And just to illustrate this, let's talk about goods transported by truck. Now, I'm not going to put a poll up for this one, so just throw into either the chat or the Q&A, your choice. What percentage of goods are transported by truck in the United States? What do you think? What percentage of goods? That includes all goods, by the way, including gasoline, kerosene, things that might go by pipeline. So everything. So you've got trains, you've got trucks, you've got pipelines, you've even got wires. Some people put those goods in there, but we don't remember. What do you think? What percentage? We got 65, 6, 80, all kinds of different answers. It turns out you can go on the web, you can search, you'll get a slight range. It's amazingly consistent. Now, these are pre-COVID numbers. COVID may change that some, just so you know. But the range in the United States is between about 68 and 72%, depending on who you believe. I went with the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, and they use 69.1. I'm just going to round that to 70%. So 70% of our goods get transported by truck some point during their time, okay? And so from a traffic standpoint, trucks are pretty important and one of the main reasons we build roads and streets. So as an exercise, you may want to take your own community and look at it and then think, what are my functional classifications? What are the important roadways? What are the arterials? What are the collectors? What are the locals? Now, an exercise that's useful is to actually sometimes do this with a blank map and just redraw them and see if you match. Now, Cornell University, because most of the roads are maintained by the university, is classified completely as a local road. But from a standpoint of managing the university, some roads are more important than others. So even within a local system, you may have roads that are more important. So keep that as we think about the why. Now let's talk about structure. We know why we need to build the roads to move things from point A to point B, but let's talk about the structure. Why do we build pavements? Well, the original idea behind building pavements was we didn't want to overstress the native material, i.e. the subgrade. After we strip off all the organics, we're left with the subgrade material, which in New York State is probably glacial till. Some places we get sand, some places rock, but glacial till is our most common material. We don't want to overstress the subgrade. And that was the idea. In fact, a lot of the original New York State DOT, Bureau of Public Roads, what they were called initially, or Department of Roads even before that, the idea was to build a foundation on top of the subgrade and then put the road on top of that. That's why if you look in the old specs where they talked about digging out and putting in select material, you were essentially building a foundation so the vehicle didn't sink out of sight, as shown in the picture here, taken a little over 100 years ago, shared with us by ARTBA. But turns out, as we've learned more and more, when it comes to the structure, what we really have to focus on is not overstressing the subgrade, but fatigue. Not exactly the same fatigue that we see with paper clips when you bend it back and forth because you're waiting on the phone, but similar to fatigue of a paper clip. And to illustrate this, I'll show you part of a video. Okay. And let's get the arrow going here. And here comes our video. And watch the two green dots that exist here. And you can actually see the pavement move under the load of these trucks. Now, these are fully loaded trucks without drivers. This is early technology. They did lose a couple. And they were testing a road to see if it would fail. It has poor drainage, as you can tell, very thin layers of asphalt. This was done by the U.S. Forest Service to see. And what it turns out is we've learned all this. Pavements don't fail like a paperclip due to stress. They fail due to strain, how much bending goes on. The more bending, the faster they fail. So when it comes to structure, we care a lot about the strain or the bending amount. So the why of a structure is to keep it from bending so much. This particular one only took 81 passes and this road completely failed. Wouldn't make for a good roadway. Good research project, not good road. But it turns out strains are the things we care about. And so the more bending, the faster the road's going to break down. So obviously in this particular case, we want to have good drainage because we don't want that water to get in the way. We don't want that water to create problems for us. And so that's an issue we need to think about, okay? So the locations of the critical strains, well, obviously there's a point right under the wheel that we care about, okay? Let me get a color that we can see here. Let me get yellow. How about yellow? So we want to care right under the wheel. There can be strain due to that. There's also a bending strain point here that might be near where the pavement bends under the load. There's also a point at the bottom of the asphalt where there's tension going on, okay? It could be an issue for us, okay? So that's something to be aware of, okay? We could have a point here on the bottom of the subgrade where there's strain, and that bending leads eventually to rutting, okay? The point is, where the pavement bends is what we care about, and we want to reduce the amount of bending as much as possible, okay? That's the goal here, as much as we can. Now, in terms of what that means to damage as we're building the structure of our roadway up, let's just ask that simple question. The damage of trucks versus the damage of cars, okay? How many passes by a car do you think it takes to do the same damage as one fully loaded 10-wheel dump truck? Again, throw that in the chat or throw that in the Q&A. How many trips by cars to do the same amount of damage as a truck? 14? 1,000? Okay. Somebody put in 200. Okay. 300. So it turns out you can do the math, and the amount of damage that is done is related to the ratio of the weight, and I'm going to just use a W for that ratio number, okay, raised to the fourth power. Now, it's not exactly 4, but it's close enough, okay? So if the car weighs 3 tons and the truck weighs 30 tons, that ratio is 10. And 10 to the fourth power would be approximately 10,000. But that doesn't take into account the fact that there are a lot more wheels on a truck. So 10,000 would be the upper limit. Normally, what most people will agree upon is that ratio is somewhere between 4 and 6,000. So you need 4 to 6,000 vehicles, cars going down the road to be the equivalent of damage. So when it comes to structure, the thickness, trucks rule. We design our roads. The why we build them is to handle those heavy loads. Okay. And of course, that means we need to worry about seasonality, which is why we post some roads in the spring, because when it roads in the spring and it's thawing, it's going to move more strain, faster failure. That's why we post it, to reduce that damage on the roadway. So when you're managing your system, that's something you may want to think about. Okay. And of course, we can get super heavy loads, something like this. They literally have to go in and calculate the load damage, even on the culverts in something like this that crosses over. This is some kind of digester system out of Iowa, okay, Lee County. Now, someone asked a question about posting. I know not everybody posts their roadways. We don't see it on the state highway system, but we certainly do it on the town system. You seasonally post the roadways to reduce the weights during the weakest time of the year, during the spring thaw period. Now, in some parts of the country, they actually go in the other direction. They allow extra weight in the winter when the pavement is frozen, because when it's frozen, it's actually stronger. More importantly, it doesn't move as much. Less strain, it lasts longer, less fatigue. Okay. Now, the surface material is a little bit of a different part of the equation. Okay, so I just want you to keep that in mind. Surface material is slightly different in terms of the equation that we deal with. So keep that in mind as you're thinking things through. Okay? The surface material is carrying the vehicle loads, yes, but more importantly, it's taking the abrasion from tires, high pressure tires, cars. In this case, all traffic matters. Now, this is a wooden streets in Philadelphia, if I remember correctly, this particular street, and it's still maintained with wood. But what is the kind of material you have on your road system? What surfaces do you have on your road system? I don't think anybody has wood that I know of. If you do, that'd be cool. Asphalt is by far the most common in New York State. We have more asphalt surfaced roadways, sometimes called blacktop, than any other single surface. And we sometimes use abbreviations like HMA. People use pavers. My driveway is pavers. You'll see sometimes cobblestone streets. You'll see gravel roadways, oil and stone. Some people have used cinders, which is still an unpaved surface. Concrete. Those folks in Iowa, the local system in Iowa has more concrete than any other single structure. And so you can see all kinds of different surface materials. Why do we choose these different surface materials? It's not part of the structure. Well, it is, but it's not the same failure mechanism. In this case, we're worried about abrasion. We're worried about surface rutting. We want to be able to be durable to hold up under traffic, and of course, not polish and get smooth, which is why we have to be very careful with limestone and things like that. Otherwise, we can get ourselves in a situation where the road becomes slippery and dangerous. The goal is we need a surface that can handle the traffic that's on it, have good friction characteristics, have good drainage characteristics. Remember, this is the roof of our roadway, okay? And survive long term. One of the things that's really important, though, is that the material underneath is the best possible material, because if it isn't, we're going to have ourselves problems. In this particular case, this was a road that had been gravel. They chip sealed it, oil and stone, for those who prefer. Now the water that used to evaporate blew the chip seal apart. You've got to have the right structure, the right materials to do the job in the right locations and handle the traffic that's on it. So the surfacing material is certainly part of the equation. It's a very important part of the equation. Okay? Whether you have asphalt or concrete or brick or pavers, and by the way, most modern brick roads are really pavers. They're just red, so they look like brick. Uh, it really matters they can handle that traffic. And of course, at intersections, this becomes an issue, especially in urban areas, because vehicles, including cars, can lead to rutting if we're not careful, and shoving and pushing at the intersection. So we have to account for that. So again, think about the why we're doing something in terms of our surfacing material. Okay? And then of course, oh, this is a failed roadway. Some people want to know, well, we're going to talk about drainage. That's a different webinar. But just keep in mind that once you lose the integrity of your surface, you can lose the entire roadway pretty darn quickly. I think this particular one is scheduled for sometime in February, but you can look on the schedule that's in the handout. I just want to briefly touch a little bit on some maintenance issues before we talk about geometry. Maintenance is key. If it's the one thing everybody should be doing, is really good maintenance practices. Maintenance is the cheapest thing. You can pay me now, you can pay me later. But you got to have good maintenance practices. You want to choose the right repair for the right road at the right time. And that comes from the National Center for Pavement Preservation. This particular repair didn't do much good at all. I'd rather do nothing than waste my money on crack repair in this particular case. But maintenance is key. It's key because it keeps that roof in good shape, just like the roof on your house, keeps the water out. It's key because it gives a good surface so that it stays safe. It's key because it makes things last a lot longer. And probably more importantly, it's good because it keeps the costs down. Okay? Because if you look at the pavement deterioration over time, roads are starting out very good shape. Most roads are very good the day you build them. Over time, they slowly deteriorate. And if you can do the maintenance while it's relatively cheap, with maybe a proper crack repair even earlier, maybe even way up here, and then do wearing course, a chip seal, a slurry seal, maybe over here, versus having to wait until you reconstruct it, your prices go up. It's cheaper to spend the dollar here to do that slurry seal than to wait down here and have to do an overlay or a rehab or maybe even a total reconstruction. So it's good for the road, it's good for the public, and it's cheaper for you as a government agency. And it turns out smooth roads are cheaper for everybody because you get better gas mileage, less repairs. Heck, the cost to the user due to rough roads can be almost as much as we're spending maintaining those road systems. So the one thing we need to definitely do, because most of our system is old, is keep the maintenance up. And once we get the road in good shape, keep it in good shape. Okay? Let's talk a little bit about geometry. There's a why behind all of the geometry. Sometimes it may not seem obvious, but even on a low volume gravel roadway, there is a why. So let's talk about that. We'll start with the width. Okay, so what does the public need? I'm going to give you three choices, and I'm going to assume in this particular case you can only pick one. If you can only pick one, are you going to go for a 10-foot wide roadway? Okay. Are you going to go for a 22-foot wide roadway from shoulder to shoulder? Or are you going to go with 36 feet? If I only let you choose one, which one are you going to vote for? A, B, or C? 10 feet, 22 feet, or 36 feet? Now, based upon where you said you were from and looking at the list of signups, if you only could choose one, most of you I was going to assume is 22 feet. A couple of you who are with cities and villages are going to go wider because that's the key. We shouldn't have a single width. We really need to build the width of the road to handle the traffic that's on that roadway. If we go back and look at our pictures, this is in Ithaca. This is a roadway that's got parking on both sides. It's got buses. It's got vehicles coming in and out, school buses. You need the extra width, okay? But if you're in a rural area, you're not going to have parking on the road. 22 feet for a county road is probably fine, okay? But if you're in a residential area, you might even be able to get away with a 10-foot wide gravel road. In fact, this is my front lawn here on the right. Okay, it's a 10-foot wide gravel road. It's fine. It meets the needs of the public, and the road should meet the needs. Okay, so one answer is probably not the right answer. Multiple choices. So in terms of the right answer, might need all of these in your particular community, especially in an urban area. You may be surprised at how often you actually need to have a larger range. And even in a rural area, don't just make every road exactly the same width. Look at the traffic that's using it. Okay. Now, time for a second little side detour. Let's talk a little bit about stopping sight distance. This is used in a lot of the geometric calculations. It's probably the single most used calculation when setting up all of the criteria and why we do things. And stopping sight distance really comes down to perception reaction distance and stopping distance. Okay. Now, the perception reaction distance is the time that it takes for us to see something and react and put our foot on the pedal. Okay. That reaction time goes up, okay, as we are distracted. So in an urban area, it may actually take a little bit longer, okay? And then the stopping distance is based upon the vehicle, the the type of vehicle, the quality of the tires, the surface conditions. Are they nice and smooth because it's snow and ice? Or do you have good friction because you've got a nice, good quality chip seal on top? So stopping distance is based upon friction factors and the vehicle. Perception reaction is the human part of the equation. And of course, anti-skid and all that can make a difference too. But let's just talk a little bit about that perception reaction distance, more importantly, the perception reaction time. How long do you think it takes if you don't know something's going to happen for you to react? In other words, all of a sudden there's a deer. How long do you think it would take for you to actually go deer and put your foot on the brake? So again, in the Q&A or in the chat, how long, how much time in seconds do you think it takes for you to actually put your foot on the brake and start the stop? Someone put in 1.5 seconds. We've got 2 seconds. It does depend. It depends on a lot of other factors, okay? Most of us are taking between 1 and 1.5 seconds, okay? Because we want to include, however, as many people as possible, including the elderly or people who might be distracted for some reason, we typically use a perception reaction time of 2.5 seconds in our calculations, okay? So when we're doing the calculations, we assume about 2.5 seconds of reaction time. Though again, we can make up that a little bit by good standards, and we'll talk about a couple of them here in just a second. The most recent design standards from Astro that have come out, and they're listed in your handout, by the way. You can go get something called the Green Book that's in the handout. They've added something called decision sight distance. I like decision sight distance. I think it's a pretty good idea, and it's something that accounts for the fact that in urban areas, especially, and even in rural areas, we made it a little bit longer time. There's so many other things going on, so we increase the sight distance. So normally in a low speed 30 mile an hour, which is most of New York State urban area, we might only need a couple of 100 feet to stop the vehicle. We actually need probably almost 400 feet, almost double that because if people are distracted. So just think about people being distracted, how much longer it takes because they're still traveling. And by the way, please put that cell phone down. That's going to add 5 seconds. Add 5 seconds to everything else. So if you're not paying attention, 5 seconds, you're going 30 miles an hour. At 30 miles an hour, that's almost 45 feet per second. You get 5 of those, you've just traveled over 200 feet. Okay. So stopping sight distance, we use that a lot. So let's talk about how we use that and why we do what we do. Now, good signage can help. Signage like this is confusing and reaction times actually could go up. But a good signage that tells people that they got to turn left and there's a sharp curve can actually improve reaction times. But we typically use 2.5 seconds. When it comes to horizontal alignment, most horizontal alignment is driven by the vehicles on the roadway. Okay? So if we put in like a mini roundabout that we see here in the city of Ithaca, you got to be able to get whatever vehicles are using that particular roadway. You might not want to put one of these little mini roundabouts where you have a lot of tractor trailers. But if you've just got single axles mostly, as long as you can handle the occasional vehicle, you should be okay. A lot of times the driving vehicle for these urban areas is actually school buses or fire trucks because they're the ones who are the most commonly using a particular segment of highway. And there are ways to account for that. And of course, we super elevate roads to deal with that fact. The super elevation allows us to go a little bit faster around the corner at the same time, not taking up more space. Okay? We have to think about intersections the same way. Think about the users on the roadway. What's the radius that they're going around the corner? Do they cut into the other lane? And if they do, is it safe? As you're thinking about improving your own system, just think about vehicles. Why are they doing what they're doing? Can they see? Do they have sight distance? Can they make that turn and staying on the pavement? If they can't, you might need to make things wider. Okay? When it comes to vertical alignment, okay, vertical alignment is driven by trucks, heavier vehicles. Trucks don't like going up steep hills. Okay? By the way, neither do bicyclists, or in this case, buggies. If you think about cars and trucks are the equivalent of pedestrians and bicyclists. If you've ever watched pedestrians, they're going to go straight. If they get the opportunity, they'd go up a super steep hill. They don't want to make a detour. They're like a car. Go straight. So vertical alignment for a car or a pedestrian is driven by whatever. Trucks and bicycles, on the other hand, they don't mind going a little bit out of their way if they can keep the grade flat, they can keep up speed. So when you think about vertical alignment, think about who's using the roadway. And if it gets too steep, can they really do it effectively? Both going up and, of course, going down. And of course, when you get a hard combination of horizontal and vertical curves, you have to account for that traffic. You may need to widen the inside of a corner to deal with the fact that trucks don't track exactly. You may need to deal with over the top of a rise. Can you see that stopping sight distance? And of course, if you've got a sag, it's too sharp. It could actually be a safety feature both at night from vehicle lights not seeing the other side, or even possibly bottoming out if it's really sharp. Okay. And of course, there's clear zone issues that you got to deal with. And we won't talk about right of way today. That's a different webinar. But let me just ask you, if your vehicle suddenly lost control and you had a choice to go left or to go right, which way are you going to go here? You're going to go left, you're going to go right. You got 2.5 seconds to decide. Going to go left. We got a left. Everybody else is just hoping they don't hit anything. Got a left. And that your brain says left. Yep. And I'm going to give you some bad news. Watch this. That's the left. There's some old stumps that were hidden in the grass. You can't quite see them when you're farther away, but look at this. If you cut down your trees, please, make sure you have a good clear zone. You want the distance from the roadway edge to hit nothing. Okay? How wide does that need to be? Depends on the volume of traffic, the type of roadway, but make sure that you don't surprise people. Don't break expectations. Okay. Now, in terms of good geometric standards, we've given you a couple in the handout, but the Astro Green Book is the national standard. New York State has a highway design manual that pretty much mirrors the Astro Green Book. There is this Astro low volume guides, a geometric design for low volume roads, can be used for roads up to about 2,000 vehicles, though you still want to use the highway design manual for some features which may not be in the low volume guide. You could develop your own, but my advice is reference somebody else's. Okay. It's really important to reference somebody else's standards, both from a liability standpoint, but also from the standpoint of why reinvent the wheel? And if things change, for instance, the Astro book was republished in 2019 from a original version in 2001. It's really nice to not have to reinvent the wheel and all of a sudden find you're out of date. Okay. So these are the whys. So what I want to do is in our local roads and streets done right workshop, we start the workshop off with the 10 commandments of a good road. Now, this could be a good street, good lane, good sidewalk, good whatever. What I'd like you to do and help me out in the Q&A or in the chat, I don't care which, I want you to tell me why this is one of the 10 commandments of a good road. Okay? So tell me why we think these are important when it comes to a road. Hopefully, I've given you enough to answer that question. So let's start with commandment number 1. Get water away from the roadway. And this picture was taken by Jay Olson. And it says, drainage is critical for roadway design. Ducts are an indicator of poor drainage. But why, from a good road standpoint, is that so critical? Safety actually is part of it. Yeah, because you certainly don't want to drive in the water. Yeah, that's one issue. What other important thing about drainage? It prevents problems underneath. Your subgrade doesn't fail. Protects the subbase. The pavement lasts longer, gets more durability. Water is really, it's not our enemy. Water is not a problem. We actually need water, but excess water is definitely our enemy because, as Doug said, it reduces strain. The more water, the more it moves, the more strain, the faster the roadway breaks down. So you need the right amount of water. Get excess water away from the roadway. Don't let it pond. Don't let it sit. And of course, yeah, when it freezes, it could really be dangerous. This particular section of street, when it freezes, could be very dangerous. Okay. So, yep, that's an easy one. Let's go to the next one. Build on a firm foundation. This is, by the way, a roadway after an earthquake, for those who are wondering. But why is building on a firm foundation so critical? Why is that one of our 10 commandments? It can lead to rutting. You get deep rutting because you don't have a firm foundation. Everything is moving. You don't need an earthquake to cause that if you've got a poor foundation underneath. It reduces, again, that strain on the surface, that structure. You've reduced the flexibility. And the pavement is only as good as the base beneath it. Yeah, great answers. So if you think about from a why standpoint, build on a firm foundation, which means you may need to box out or move the road in a different spot or put in one of these geocells. Do something to build yourself a firm foundation in some cases. Okay. Use the best materials available. Okay. Why is that so critical? Longevity. And I like that phrase there. Cheap is expensive. Paying cheap now sounds great, but it doesn't pay in the long run. It's a lot better to buy good material to start. Use the best product that you possibly can. Yes, I know budgets are critical, but it really makes a huge difference. Use the best quality material you possibly can. I understand budgets, and we'll definitely be talking about that, but use the best materials available. Compact all materials well. When it comes to building a roadway, putting in a culvert, building a bridge, compaction is key. Okay? Why is compaction key? It does actually reduce the strain. Yep. It prevents settling. It turns out if you look at the way roads and all materials in roads work, if you compact them well initially, they're not going to continue to settle. But if you don't compact them, traffic eventually will cause them to settle. And if you think about it, we'll draw our roadway here. Not my best lines, but imagine I didn't compact it well and I got my tires. Well, guess what? It's going to settle, but it's going to settle underneath where my tires are. So I'm going to get rutting. I'm going to get movement. So you really want to compact things well. Spend the money on compaction. Okay? Design for winter maintenance. Why is that one of our 10 commandments? I mean, why? Why? This is, basics of a road. We're talking about structure and traffic and alignment, but design for winter maintenance, why is that in our list? A bit more of a challenging one, but it's actually pretty important in northern tier states to essentially design for winter maintenance. You need a place to put the snow. You need to think about safety. It actually does reduce the cost of maintaining that roadway. You think about the drainage off to the edge. It improves safety. When you're thinking about alignment, you may actually want to think about where is the snow going to go when I throw it? When we put in roundabouts, dead end roadways in an urban area, where do you put the snow? How do you safely do so? And if you do it right, it drains properly and you don't get excess water when it all melts, because this is all going to melt at some point. So think about that as you're rebuilding or looking at a roadway. How do you design for winter maintenance? Design for the traffic loads and the volumes on the roadway. Okay. Obviously, that makes a huge difference. Okay. Now, that could be a very low traffic, low weight, but very important. Or it could be something like you posted the roadway for, in this case, 8 tons in the spring. Okay. Why is that on our list? Yeah, economics. If we design for the traffic loads and volumes, we can put more money in the more important roadways, the arterials, less in the local system, and spread our dollars out a little bit further. Maybe we live with a little bit rougher road and a local road or residential street and a smoother mainline roadway. It's a balance, okay? Because it does always come back to economics. But also design the roads to handle the loads. Because again, pay me now or pay me later. Pave roads only when they are ready. That's one of our more important ones, and yet we see that one violated all the time. Why is this in our list? Why do we pave roads only when they are ready? I think I've stumped them. You want to prevent quick failure. You don't want to have failure issues, prevents rapid deterioration. And if you cover that problem up, it's going to come back to bite you when you least expect it. This particular picture, the day after I took it, they put an overlay down. The road was not ready for that. So you've really poured money, pretty expensive money, it's $100 a ton for asphalt. It's not going to last. And that's a lot of money that you've wasted. So from a budgetary standpoint, only pave it when it's ready. And yes, sometimes we've all chip sealed in a snowstorm, but sometimes you have to make decisions like that, but don't say, oh, it's going to last anyway. Pave only when ready, even if you have to delay sometimes. You have to balance budgets and economics and all that. Build from the bottom up. Now, this is not the same as building on a firm foundation. What do we mean by, and why is it important to build from the bottom up? Why is it important to build from the bottom up? Reflective cracking eliminates the poor subgrade. It's also an economic decision. As you build your pavement up, the gravel at the bottom, the base or even the subgrade, that's the cheap stuff. As you come up, it gets more expensive. Okay? So make sure to spend the more money on the cheap stuff. And you can't build from the top down. So when you want the road to last as long as possible, put in a bigger base so that, yeah, if it fails at the surface. I can fix the surface pretty easily. Mill and fill, things like that. Really hard to pick the roadway up, replace the base, and put it back down. So think about what is at the bottom. Spend your resources wisely. Absolutely. And then protect your investment. Uh, really, this comes back to maintenance. We got to do the maintenance more than anything else. Maintenance is key. Pay me now or pay me later. And our final of our 10 commandments is keep good records. And some people go, why is that important from a building a roadway standpoint? But again, I said earlier, our phrase from our old director, how do you know what you don't know if you don't know you don't know it? You've got a roadway, you don't know how much strength it has to it, you don't know what's underneath, you don't have good records, you really have a hard time building the proper roadway, putting in the proper alignment, handling the traffic that's on it. Okay? So 3 real quick questions to do our PDH friends to make everybody happy. Yeah, track mistakes and good decisions. Yeah. By the way, if you do a daily log, by the way, for anybody who does, if you see no issues, write that down. That actually can protect you in court later on. So it's a good habit to get in. Write down even the good things. So let's do our 3 questions that make our PDH people happy, but also is a good reminder for you. What percentage of goods are transported by truck? 40, 50, 60, 70, or 80%? Let's see what we got here. Got a person who said D. We got votes for D. Okay. Yep, pretty much. Everybody's gotten that one. That's pretty good. Okay. 70% correct. Very good. Okay. How many car passes are needed to the damage of one fully loaded truck? I should say 10-wheel dump truck, but just to save space, I just said fully loaded truck. Yeah, 4 to 6. The calculations could be as high as 10,000, but the reality is because of those extra wheels, 4 to 6 is what most people will agree upon. But the key is when you think about structure, think about the heavier vehicles, the trucks, the semi-tractors, even the buses. Okay? Perception reaction time used in geometric design. What do we use? 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, or 5 seconds. Now, most of us, our actual reaction times are closer to the answer some of you are answering. But for design purposes, we usually use 2.5 seconds because we want to account for most drivers. 85th percentile, you may have heard in some discussions. But essentially, we want to include people who may have a little slower reaction time just from a safety standpoint. Okay? And 5 seconds, by the way, is what happens if you start texting. So put the text down. So now hopefully you've got a better sense. I'm stealing about a minute of your time, but you've hopefully got a better sense of why we build roadways, what makes a good roadway. This is an excellent roadway. It doesn't have to be super wide if it handles the traffic that's on it. So these are the ones we had before. Just think about it. Why do we build roadways? And if you think about why we build roadways, you're going to have a better road system and everybody will be better off. Okay? And some of the things we talked about before are still true, but also we think about the traffic, the structure, and the alignment. Okay? Now we do have more webinars coming up. We had basics today. Next week is snow and ice. It's really not the overall view. This is really the strategy to get us ready for the winter. Budget basics, traffic safety, and then the MUTCD before we take a break around the holidays and the end of the year. With that, if you do have any questions, you've got any issues, you can email us. You can go on our website. You can email me directly. My email address is david.orr@cornell.edu. Be glad to answer any of your questions. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Tell your friends. We'd like to see more of you. And see us on our fundamental series as we go through. And this is going to take us a while on our journey to help everybody have good roads and a good day. Be kind, be well. Take care. Bye-bye.